So I wonder if you could start by saying something about the service that you offer here at Step 2.
Yeah, Step 2 is an early intervention service for young people. We're a goal-focused service, and normally the goals are established once we've done some form of assessment or had a chat with the family and young people. That we are a 0 to 19 service. We tend to offer a service once the young people have had some form of intervention first within the community. So that's kind of, and I suppose the things that tend to come that we tend to see are things like children with anxiety, low mood, and obviously anxieties cover a whole multitude of things. So really it's about engaging with young people who are having difficulties with their emotional mental health. So we're really an emotional mental health wellbeing service.
And do you just work with the young people, or do you work with the families as well?
Well, we all know that children don't just come on their own. Children are within a community. So we work with the young person and their community, and that could be their family, it could be their school. So we would establish that at the time of the assessment where the work needs to be focused on. And sometimes that focus of work can be individually, or it might be best set in a group environment, and we do really have seen the benefits of group work within Step 2. So yeah.
I was thinking that I might feel a bit worried about coming along to a group because of having to talk in front of other people, and that's something that I think a lot of young people feel nervous about.
Yeah.
What would you say about that?
Well, I've run many groups with young people in, and I think that first time when they always come through the door, they're always nervous, they're always anxious. Like any of us doing anything new, it's understandable, we all get a bit anxious, but I think when they finish the group and we ask them that question, one of the most common responses we get from young people is, you've got to give it a go, because actually it's never as bad as what you think it is. And they all form friendships, and they just realise that the benefits of actually being in a group environment compared to one-to-one sessions, especially because they come with a person that's caring for them. And I think for them both to have the same input is also really beneficial.
Earlier you were talking a bit about assessments, and I think for some people that seems to make them think about tests or exams, and that might make them feel quite nervous. Could you say a bit about what would happen in an assessment?
Yeah, so assessment can be face-to-face or over the telephone, and it's about us trying to gather information, and then what we gather the information from talking to the young person, maybe a family member or a parent, a carer, and then we gather all of that information, and there's no tests involved, and we just, at the end of that, we very collaboratively decide what is the best solution or the best focus for that young person. And we might not be the right service at that point. We might actually suggest some other things that might be of more benefit to the young person. So we can collaboratively at the end of that really think about what is the best focus for that child, especially when we look at what their goals are. Their goals might be different to others around them, and I think that's really important that the young person has the opportunity to have their voice heard.
So it sounds like that would be really helpful for people to think about before they come for their assessment, to think about what they might want for themselves, or what kind of hopes they have for their mental health difficulties or their emotional well-being, so that as they come into the appointment they feel kind of clear about that.
Yeah, I always think it's really, really helpful if you come in thinking about what your actual difficulties are, what you feel are your difficulties, and then also thinking about what you would like to get if you do come into the service, and what your goals might be. Because sometimes when you're come for an assessment, it can feel quite overwhelming, and I think so just having those few things beforehand is really, really helpful.
The other thing I'd been thinking about is how long people have to wait for their appointments, because we all know that the NHS is kind of maybe under-resourced, or there were sometimes long waits for interventions. Is that something that would be the case for step 2?
I think like any NHS service, we all have waiting times. I think it's no different to any other service within the NHS. I think it's really helpful to think about where else maybe you can get a bit of support from in the meantime.
Yeah.
And there's always other things that are out there. There might be local support groups, schools might be able to point you in a direction. There's sometimes they'll have a family support worker attached to the school. There's always the school nursing service. They might be able to sort of point you in the directions for why you're having to do that waiting time.
And at the end of the input that you offer, what would tend to happen at that point? So if someone's had, say, their group intervention, or they've had their one-to-one intervention, what happens at the end of those sessions?
Well, I think it's like anything, we give you a lot of techniques and strategies, and very often it is about going away and having a really good practice at all of those strategies and techniques that we've given you. And you really do have to embed them over a period of time, and I think that's really important to remember that. If you've had your difficulties for a few years, you're not going to sort of all of a sudden wake up the next day and everything's completely better. So I think as long as you start seeing some form of improvement, I think it's really important that you go away and embed those techniques and strategies. I think at the end of that treatment, it's about collaboratively working with the therapist that you've been working with to decide the next steps. And that can be that your next steps might be that you move up to the next tier, which is a tier 3 CAM service, which the clinician at the time would explain all of that with you, and then you can collaboratively think about if that's what you want. Some also decide that they might then go and have a different form of therapy, say in the private sector or with local charities. So I think it's just about at the end of the course of treatment that you decide.
So it sounds really important that people have a really good go at putting the strategies into place, and then think, okay, is there any other input that I need at this point? And it sounds really important as well that young people are supported by their communities, as you were saying, so that might be school or parents or a carer to help embed some of those strategies. Is there anything else that you think young people or their families or referrers need to know about the service? Anything really important that we haven't talked about today?
I think we're an accessible service. I think it's always important that to share any difficulties and problems you're having along the way, either with the clinician or there's always an office number with an answer phone. We're not an emergency service, and I think that's really important for families to remember that and young people to remember that we're not an emergency service. But if you want to talk things through, then I think we're always very accessible with that.
Thank you very much for your time.